Louis C.K. is back. He performed in New York for a surprise 15-minute set at a comedy club that the owner didn't even know about. At the end of the set, he apparently was greeted with a standing ovation, like welcome back to the public scene. I wanted to make this video to explain why I think this is not acceptable. I know it's complicated. People like him. I liked his comedy. His comedy's still, a lot of it's still good. But people want to believe in redemption, right? But I still think this is not acceptable. So I'm making this to tell you why. The complicating tension here is striking a correct balance between redemption and accountability. Right? We need to hold people accountable for assault, but we also can't hold people's mistakes against them forever. So, like, what kind of world would it be if we didn't allow people to learn from their mistakes and move forward? My short answer to this is this world, right? I'll get to that. But here's my like line in the sand. He needs to see jail time, a settlement for the victims, or no stage time, and I'll explain that. Okay, it's true that the redemption narrative is an ideal that we should strive for in the nation, right? I support social forgiveness, second chances. I think it's possible that after accountability, rehabilitation, and or victim compensation, people who commit crimes should be welcomed back into the world. This, by necessity, like has to occur on a case-by-case basis. I just think that in Louis C.K.'s case, there hasn't been enough of any of these three things. So quick sidebar, right? In terms of the actual world, this redemption narrative is a total myth. It's not how society currently works for many Americans. Redemption is especially difficult for Black Americans and for the poor. If you're poor, bad credit and a few like bad years of finances can follow you for the rest of your life. Virginia Eubanks has a book on this. And for Black Americans, wrongful criminal convictions can follow you for the rest of your life too. Right? Forced plea deals and higher rates of sentencing for similar crimes means it's harder to get jobs, to vote, to access public assistance programs, like all these things. So if you're willing to pardon Louis C.K. because you believe in second chances, like as a sidebar, I think I'd encourage you to apply that concept more liberally to society at large, or not to be so quick to pardon like funny rich white guys. Cool. So I support the redemption narratives and I support social forgiveness for the poor and for the rich. I just think that there are necessary conditions for redemption. So let's talk about that. I found this quote on a talking head show, E! News or something, where a talking head says that Louis C.K. apologized, and so it's all okay, right? He came clean, and so that's fine. None of the other Me Too men, which is like a category now, apparently, did that. And so if he apologized, it's okay. I would say sure if accountability was actually held sufficiently, right? If he was held sufficiently accountable, apologizing would matter. But in my opinion, he has not been held accountable yet. Cool. So an example. Last week, true story, I was robbed on a hike. Someone broke into the car, broke into the locked glove box, and took my debit and credit cards, and then relocked it all to deceive us and get more time to get out of town to make a purchase. Would it matter if they apologized? If they said like, I mean, I believe in redemption, but like we can talk apologies after you've paid for the broken lock and gave me my money back, right? And possibly, since they're criminal now, like maybe some jail time, but like that's a complicated discussion, or at least due process, right? At least due process. So other examples, like can a murderer avoid jail time by apologizing? Can a powerful murderer avoid consequences if they're just like really woke about it? Like they, like Louis C.K. did, they write a New York Times article explaining like why they feel bad now about what they did. Like if how they understand that like when you have power over another person, murdering them is a predicament for them, right? No, it doesn't matter if you apologize if you haven't been held accountable. And here's where the gray area begins. Like here's where it gets complicated because there is a gray area, and a reasonable person can disagree with me on this, and a reasonable person can make the claim that he already has been held accountable because he was publicly shamed, he apologized, he probably lost lots of money. He did lose lots in terms of lost revenue for his shows that got canceled and all this jazz. And so, like many people on Twitter and on the talking head shows are saying, like, in their opinion, he's paid his debt. But in my opinion, I disagree. I draw my own personal line in what I view as a very reasonable place, right? Jail time or settlement for the victims or no stage time. And like, maybe you think that's wrong. Maybe you think that's crazy. But like, despite the really good examples that I had above, the murder analogies, right? Maybe you think an apology is enough if it's a sexual crime. Maybe you think monetary loss in like 8 months of being on the bench is sufficient if it's a sexual crime. But here are my two big problems with this line of thinking and why I'm making this video. One, these are voices in the court of public opinion, not jurors or judges in an actual court of actual law. Two, the entire analysis, this entire public conversation about like, has it been long enough for the Me Too men to come back? It has been occurring without a second's consideration for the actual women who were victims and the actual effect that this had on their lives, their emotional well-being, and their careers. Those need to be in the conversation. So at one, right, we can't trust the court of public opinion in cases of sexual crime for a few reasons. First, this is a bit of a tangent, but like by the definition of an oppressed class, public opinion will always favor those in power. Second, the court of public opinion is only useful for high-profile crimes. When Weinstein or Spacey or Louis C.K. is accused, people care because it's dramatic to see the powerful fall and we want to chime in. But when an average Joe man like is involved with a crime, public opinion doesn't really address the problem, right? How many of you, for example, heard about the man who killed his girlfriend or girl, who knows, at the Astor Place subway stop in New York a few months back? I had to walk by, what was me? Like I walked by the place where she was shot a lot, almost every day, because I had to on my way to where I was going. The court of public opinion did her no good. An entire premise of the Me Too movement is that sexually motivated violence against women is normalized. And it's every day. We know the statistics, and since public outcry seldom occurs for everyday women, we need systematic legal changes to allow for accountability to occur. Okay, alternatively stated, suppose you say something else. You say like, hey, Louis C.K. is off the hook. Like I looked up the statute of limitations and it expired. So according to our system, he's fine. What are we going to do? There's just no structure in place to hold people accountable for this, legally speaking. And if that's where your head's at, if you're like, oh, no, there's nothing we can do, right? Then that's the point. That's entirely the point. If you're using this logic to defend the male victims of Me Too, then you've stumbled onto the necessity of Me Too itself. Okay, so at the lack of women, right? So while we're out here debating the rights of the male criminals, it seems we're missing something really important, which is where are the women in the discussion? What does it say about our society that we can have an entire conversation about this being right or wrong and not discuss like the impact on women? We seem to be willing to care more about the emotional state and the justice redemption arc of a man who harmed women than we do for the women who were harmed. This is why my line in the sand includes a settlement for the women. If the legal system hasn't allowed Louis C.K., an admitted criminal actor, to go through due process and be convicted, right, then we need to spend our time and energy on the women and compensating them. Like this debate is not about whether or how fast men can come back from messing up, right? The right debate is when and how will women be compensated given our justice system has failed them? And more generally, how do we systematically compensate them given that the justice system systematically fails them? If that doesn't make sense yet, like let's go back to last week when I got robbed, right? So I've talked to the police, there's a report, but likely they'll never be caught. It was like on a highway robbery situation, hikes, doesn't matter, right? But I'm okay with that for a couple reasons, right? Personally, because the fraud prevention system prevented them from actually permanently getting any of my money. And I want them to be caught because I want them to like learn that that's not okay to do and all these important things. But like, I'll settle for not losing my money. I have to deal with the inconvenience of like activating new cards, but I'll settle because a system exists outside the criminal prosecution system that compensated for my losses. Right? But in the case of sexual assault, when the legal system fails women, there is no other system to compensate them, right? That's the debate we ought to be having, right? That's the real gray area that deserves our attention. Is the Louis C.K. debate a gray area? Does it need to be solved? Yes. But there are other gray areas that are just as important, if not more important. How do we compensate a woman for a lack of advancement in her career because of a man's actions? How do we compensate a woman for the emotional harm done by men who've chosen to harm them? Like, what legal frameworks can we put in place to require men to make these compensations in the first place, given that we seemingly are unable to convict them for many reasons? What dollar value is it for the women whose careers did not advance? Like, that's a great calculation that we need to be working on. So we shouldn't be asking if Louis C.K. needs 8 months on the bench or 8 years or indefinitely. Like, we should be asking if he should pay for the therapy bills, as well as the therapy bills and settlement on how much damage to their careers was done, right? That is in general what we should be focusing on. We should focus less on what's just for a particular man and care more about what's just for a particular woman. Second sidebar, I would be remiss if I didn't cite the origin of this second insight, right? This cultural tendency this cultural tendency to focus on men and justice for male perpetrators instead of women comes from Kate Mann's book called The Logic of Misogyny. Sorry, it's called Down Girl, and the subtitle is The Logic of Misogyny. And she calls it himpathy, right? I guarantee you, once this word's in your head, right, it's never going away. It's like the FedEx arrow. You will not be able to not see it. And a huge example of this, a huge chunk of the debate on the Brock Turner case, for example, was like, is his sentence too long? Is it too severe? Shouldn't we let the poor kid learn from his mistakes? No time is spent in the public conversation about the victim, right? The social desire to spend emotional and intellectual energy sympathizing with and defending sexually violent males is himpathy. And it is the dead canary in the social misogynist coal mine that we live in. Right? A sure sign that pussy-grabbing president culture of toxic masculinity needs a come-to-Jesus moment. Okay, so back to the main question. Should Louis C.K. be allowed back onto the stage? Has it been long enough? This is a hard question, but I think it's one of the wrong questions. Right? It's not just too soon, it's wrong. And it will be wrong until he has been prosecuted under new laws. Spitballing here, maybe the statute of limitations has exceptions for cases that you can make a case that it would have been impossible for them to come forward at the time. Anyway, it will be wrong until he compensates the women in as just a way as possible given his actions. Right? A New York Times apology isn't enough. And how long we wait until the men are in the clear is always going to be the wrong question until we solve the harder question of how we bring justice to the women that our justice system continually fails. Hi, welcome to this channel. It's got a lot of things on it. Lots of things are developing. I'm throwing a link of the blog version of this if you want to read it instead, down in the description, and a new website. So if you're new here or you've been around, there's a new website. Check that out. It's under construction. Let me know if you find errors that you want me to fix right away, because I don't know how to use Squarespace. The YouTube ads lied. It's not so easy. Shout out to Kate Mann for Dr. Mann for her concepts of empathy. Read her book. It's really good. I'll throw out a link in the description below. And I'll also link a couple of articles that were written since I made this video that are also really good about this case. Great. Have a great day. Talk to you in the next one.